Let's talk about how close we are to potential World War III.
Way too close.
How could this end up in World War III?
I think a couple of different ways, right? You get to a situation where is a Russian red line crossed? They're a nuclear power. Do they start using tactical nuclear weapons in eastern Ukraine? If that happens, then at least some of the Eastern European countries like Poland have to get involved. That balloons into a World War III scenario. I think the most likely and the most dangerous scenario is Iran and Israel right now. What if in North Israel, a bunch of Iranian-backed militias start killing thousands of Israeli civilians? So the Israelis invade, do the Iranians counterattack, and now you have Israel, Iran in a regional conflict. And then the final thing, man, is China wants Taiwan, right? Everything that we have tells us the Chinese want Taiwan. America, I think, has left Taiwan in a really crappy position because we've sent all our weapons to Ukraine. The Taiwanese, I don't know that they could repel a Chinese invasion right now.
What did it feel like for you to sit down in front of Putin?
Great. I enjoyed that thoroughly.
Did you?
Yeah.
Were you fearful at all?
Only in one moment. He's definitely had journalists killed. It's a problem. And we actually had a plane on standby because we were worried that something could happen. We sat together, I've interviewed him now 5 times. And it was when I was moderating his economic conference with Prime Minister Modi of India that I got in his face about the chemical weapons in Syria and how Russia had helped fund Assad. And he got really pissed. That was the one thing I asked him, and of all the things that he was genuinely angry about, and you could almost see the switch flip in his head where he went to genuine anger. And I remember being like, whoa, I gotta pull back. I've crossed some imaginary line I didn't know was there, a tripwire. And I did pull back. And enough that he continued to grant me more interviews and so on. But what a dynamic, fascinating, terrible man.
To go over there and put yourself in that situation that takes a lot of courage.
It was crazy.
When you get into office, if you get into office, will you be able to sit Zelensky and Putin down and have them negotiate a deal so that we can spend the next $175 billion on our own infrastructure?
2 countries. Should have never happened. Would have never, ever happened. And it didn't happen. For 4 years, there was no talk about Russia going in. I knew Putin very well. Got along with him. They say, you got along with Putin? That's a terrible thing. He said, no, that's a good thing. He's got 1,800 nuclear weapons. So do we. And when I hear these poor fools talking about global warming, they don't call it that anymore. They call it climate change. Go back many, many decades and look at Hiroshima, Nagasaki. That was so many years ago. And now you look at today and multiply that, what took place there, by 300, 400 times. The biggest problem we have, and the world has, is weaponry. And these poor fools talk about global warming all the time. It's going to global warm to a point where the oceans will rise 1/8 of an inch in 355 years. You know, they have no idea what's going to happen to weather.
Strategic command, it's the most important combatant command that almost nobody has ever heard of outside of strategic command, outside of the military structure. The commander of strategic command is in charge of the nukes. He's in charge of them. He's the steward of them. There's 150,000 employees beneath him in his chain of command. When the president needs to launch nuclear weapons, he communicates with the STRATCOM commander. That's how important the STRATCOM commander is.
Okay. And you got access to him.
I did.
And you guys had a discussion about this.
We did.
How did that start?
Origins, like very much, it's what I relate to about your podcast, like his origins, like how did you wind up the commander of STRATCOM, right? And like he wanted to be a musician. So it's like a nuclear war could be triggered by any nuclear launch at the United States, period, right? So there are now 9 nuclear-armed nations. In my scenario, I chose a rogue launch from a ballistic missile, an intercontinental ballistic missile. Just like it sounds, it can travel from one continent to the other in 30 minutes. That's an ICBM. Launch to target. 30 minutes.
That's the farthest target.
33 minutes is actually from Pyongyang. 26 minutes and 40 seconds from Moscow to the East Coast. This is specificity. It doesn't change. All the new weapon systems, that doesn't change. That is what it was when they were invented. This is just basic physics. It goes up and over the earth and down. And so then once you know that, wait, that's all it takes? This is not a 9/11 scenario where, you know, someone whispers in the president's ears, sir, the planes have hit the buildings. It's not that. This on the cover here is a thermonuclear bomb called Ivy Mike. This is the first thermonuclear bomb ever exploded in 1952 in the Marshall Islands. It was a test. Hiroshima was 15 kilotons. This is 10.4. megatons.
Wow.
Think about that scale. An atomic bomb acts as its triggering mechanism inside the bomb. I interviewed the man who drew the plans for this bomb.
No kidding.
93 now. Richard Garwin. Talk about classified. His information was so classified, no one knew he even drew the plans to the bomb. He was 24 years old when he drew them.
Are you serious? Does he regret drawing them?
I asked him that question. I said, do you wish that you hadn't drawn the plans for the thermonuclear bomb? And he said to me, after a long pause, I wish they couldn't have been drawn.
Wow.
I mean, we could do a whole podcast on what that might mean. When the EMP nuclear weapon goes off earlier than that, launched into space by North Korea disguised as a radio satellite, it takes out the entire grid. That's what an EMP exploded 300 miles over the center of the country would do. It's a colossal failure of everything electric. And so in essence, the ability to understand what anyone is doing outside what you can physically see disappears. We only know so much about history back to where people started writing it down. It's just guesswork before then, archaeological interpretation. So man, 5000 BC, figures out how to write. So we've had a 7,000-year run of history. And once all electronics cease, in the world in which we live today, just the information goes. Everything on your computer is gone. Mm-hmm. Who writes longhand anymore besides me and a couple of others?
Not very many people.
Not very many people. So China last year was reported to have 400 nuclear weapons. This year they have 500. That is deeply concerning. Mm-hmm. The Defense Department believes that in the next 10 years, China will have 1,500. Russia is not building new nuclear weapons, allegedly. Neither are we. India and Pakistan are understood to have about 165, I think it is, each.
Okay.
But when you really drill down on it, you realize that we don't really know. The transparency from them is limited, and how much intelligence the agency has on it is anyone's guess.
What about our allies? What about UK and France?
UK, I believe, has about 200, and I'm forgetting the exact number of France right now. But the UK is interesting because they have reduced their weapons systems down to only submarines, which is really interesting.